Well, that didn't take very long. Dan Lanning and the Ducks score another big commitment from the transfer portal. And we're back like we never left. Oregon fans, what's going on? How we living? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. Just in case you're new here, welcome to the show. I'm your host, Max Torres, publisher and lead editor of Ducks Digest, covering the Oregon Ducks over on Fan Nation, part of the Sports Illustrated Network. It is Friday, January 12th. 2024. Happy Friday to everyone. And a special thanks to you everydayers that are rocking with us here on the podcast or on YouTube at Oregon Football Max Torres. Do me a favor, make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel as we are growing this Oregon football community. So, big news, second big news story of the day on Thursday. Texas A&M wide receiver Evan Stewart has committed to Oregon. The former five-star recruit is heading to Eugene. What a massive addition out of the transfer portal for Dan Lanning and the Ducks. Not even 24 hours after Dan Lanning confirms that he is staying in Eugene amid the Alabama coaching search as the Crimson Tide look for Nick Saban's successor after capturing 6 national championships in Tuscaloosa. Some of the other names that we've been continuing to kind of keep our eye out for are Steve Sarkisian, Mike Norvell, Washington's Kalen DeBoer. We don't know yet. We're still waiting to see when that one's going to get announced, but I'm sure Oregon fans are breathing a sigh of relief knowing that their guy is going to be staying in Eugene for the long haul. But Evan Stewart is a massive, should I say it again? Why not? Massive addition in the transfer portal for the Ducks. Really speedy, twitchy, technically sound wide receiver that comes to Eugene via College Station. He was one of the top ranked recruits in the entire country when he was coming out of high school. Looking at his 247 sports profile, he was rated, 5-star, 0.9940 on the 247 sports composite, number 11 player nationally, the number 2 wide receiver, and the number 4 recruit in the Lone Star State. That is the state of Texas, coming out of Frisco Liberty High School. And man, he wasn't like crazy at Texas A&M. If you're just looking at the production across 2 seasons, he had just a little over 1,100 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns, 38 catches in 2023. For what it's worth, 2023 was the better of the 2 seasons for him. 38 receptions for 514 yards and 4 touchdowns. And this guy is going to be a huge weapon in Will Stein's offense. Let's see, we didn't really know too much. We hadn't heard a whole lot about other schools that were involved here, but I'm not surprised that this commitment happened because during the visit weekend that he was on campus was kind of around that same time that I was in San Antonio for the Adidas All-American Bowl. So I guess that would just be last weekend. I was hearing some really positive buzz that this could happen. And then one of my sources was telling me, maybe it had cooled a little bit. But I never thought that it was going to be done after hearing that it was, maybe a little bit cooler. It kind of seemed like I was getting the impression that this was a guy who wanted to take some more visits. I mean, it's so interesting to me because there's no way, but how often do you hear about a visit and Oregon doesn't knock it out of the park? Well, that was the case again, clearly here with Evan Stewart, but the feel was coming out of the visit, he was going to kind of think things over and maybe visit some other programs. I know USC was another school that I had seen mentioned with regard to Stewart's recruitment. So the fact that they were able to get what I believe was the first visit for Evan Stewart as a transfer portal guy, that is absolutely massive. And he was one of those guys that we saw at Texas A&M. We knew he was a super highly rated recruit, highly ranked recruit from that historic 2022 recruiting class, and you were always kind of keeping tabs on his name. Is this guy going to enter the portal? We feel like he's going to. David Hicks is another one that I know people have been trying to keep an eye on for a while, but he still hasn't entered. But Evan Stewart is just a really, really talented wide receiver. And I think that if you're looking for a successor to Troy Franklin, I don't know if you're looking for if I would deem it a successor. He's got 2 years of eligibility remaining. Maybe he comes to Eugene and he has a really, really good season in 2024 and decides to go to the NFL or test the NFL waters after that. But not entirely sure. Listed at 6 foot, 175 pounds. So it gives you a feel for what size of a receiver that you're looking at here. I think that Oregon had I don't know if I want to say need, maybe a want at wide receiver. Not to say that they were lacking talent, but you lose a guy like Troy Franklin, who's probably the best receiver the program has ever seen, and you're going to want to get some more weapons. But again, I don't think that they needed those weapons, right? If you're just looking at the wide receiver room for Oregon now, it's stacked, absolutely stacked under Junior Adams. So you have Evan Stewart now, the newest addition. And then you have Tez Johnson, who, he didn't do too much. He just broke 1,000 yards in his first year with the Ducks, coming over from Troy. So if there were any doubters out there about Tez Johnson, he silenced all of those critics. And then you have Trayshawn Holden, the former Alabama wide receiver. He came over from the Ducks and had a pretty solid year. I don't think that Trayshawn Holden necessarily blew a lot of people away, but I just don't think that there was necessarily a lot of volume there for Trayshawn Holden to capitalize on having a big season, right? But that said, the opportunities that he did get, he capitalized on, had a great performance in the Fiesta Bowl. I almost called it the Liberty Bowl, but I didn't. In the Fiesta Bowl against Liberty, and then he announces that he's coming back for another year. So you have two guys that are incredibly experienced at the top of your wide receiver room. You also have Gary Bryant Jr., the former USC wide receiver. Again, one of those transfers that had a relatively quiet year in terms of production, but he got in the end zone in the Fiesta Bowl. So he's heading into 2024 with some good momentum. So you have those guys that played a lot of football for you last year that are coming back. But then how about behind them? You have a lot of young guys that still haven't seen too much playing time. And I think that Jurion Dickey, the former 5-star wide receiver recruit, has to be near the top of that list. He was battling an injury for much of his freshman year. I should say not battling an injury, but recovering from an injury. I think he had a meniscus tear is what he said. Right at the start kind of his senior year in high school, coming out of Menlo Atherton in the Bay Area where Troy Franklin went to high school. So out in my stomping grounds, being a Bay Area native. But you have Jurion Dickey. Is he going to be able to take a step forward? I think that the projection and the trajectory certainly would indicate that they hope for him to have a bigger role in Eugene next year. Then you have Kyler Casper. You have Justice Lowe as some of the other names in that wide receiver room. Chris Hudson made his departure to Washington State, heading out to the Palouse to play for Jake Dickert, staying in the Pacific Northwest. But then you also have some of these 2024 wide receiver recruits, and man, you have more big-time talent coming to play for that man, Junior Adams. You have Ryan Pelham, former USC wide receiver commit out of Long Beach, California. Milliken, gotten to see him a lot during his high school career, and that dude is a stud. Really, really big playmaker. He's got it all. He's got speed. He's got creativity with the ball in his hands, yards after the catch, body control. I mean, I saw him and Jordan Anderson at Milliken when I first moved out here to Southern California, and Ryan Pelham was someone that was nearly impossible to miss, making plays on offense and defense. Certainly was the heart of that Milliken offense in both years, being 2022 and 2023. So you have him, and all you did was flip him from USC as a Southern California kid from Lincoln Riley and the Trojans. Now he's going to be playing out in Eugene and kind of following that family legacy, right? When you had Don Pelham, the former Oregon linebackers coach, He's actually still living in Eugene, I think is the word these days. So that'll be cool for him to have that family connection. And then you have Jeremiah McClellan out of St. Louis, Missouri, who you flipped from Ohio State during the early signing period. What a massive recruiting win that was. He's getting a lot of early hype just as a guy who is college ready. And I've seen him in person before, and that dude is super, super talented. But it's also interesting just to kind of pump the brakes a little bit because you can see all the it's easy to get carried away with all the stars and all the high rankings and the all-American distinction, this, that, and the third. But this is a crowded wide receiver room, and we're not even finished talking about all the names, right? So I think it's going to be interesting to see how this room ultimately shakes out once all these guys get here. You also have Dylan Gresham out of San Jacinto, California. If you haven't heard of San Jacinto, it's a pretty small town. I'd say it's probably an hour and a half away from me in Long Beach. Um, I went to go see his commitment ceremony in person, and I've gotten to see him on the 7-on-7 circuit a little bit. Speedster, deep threat guy. And then you also have Jack Wrestler out of Santa Ana Mater Dei. So this wide receiver room is crazy loaded for Junior Adams and the Ducks. And I think that, can we just talk about another point? The Ducks are on fire. You can see it there on the ticker. The Ducks are absolutely on fire. Dan Lanning announces that he is staying in Eugene amid the coaching rumors with the Alabama coaching search. And I talked a lot about that yesterday on the podcast with just Oregon having coaching stability for what feels like the first time in forever. Like I mentioned, I kind of dated myself. I didn't really start following the Ducks until the Chip Kelly era. Later in the Chip Kelly era, that is. So he was obviously a pretty long tenured coach, the longest tenured coach in my lifetime. And now Dan Lanning is looking like he is going to try to surpass that. He looks like he's in it for the long haul. So what a breath of fresh air that is for Oregon fans anywhere in the country, just to know that your coach is in there and is going to be staying. But, you know, it's because it felt like it happened every year, right? You have a coach who does well and they play well on the field. He recruits well. And then, oh, what do you know? Here we go again. Another big time program comes calling. But as long as you can keep that man, Dan Lanning, at the helm in Eugene, I think that you can overcome a lot of challenges that maybe come your way, whether that be player departures, coaching attrition. We've already seen a couple of moves this offseason. Colin Lockett, the assistant running backs coach, he got hired as the wide receivers coach at UC Davis. So that's a move for him. And then you also have what I reported a couple of days ago. It looks like UCLA is going to hire Tony Washington Jr., a former Oregon lineman, to coach their defensive line out there in Westwood. That's what it's looking like. That's the expectation. So you see some guys moving, and Dan Lanning said it a bunch of times himself, is you wouldn't have people coming after the coaches if people didn't see the writing on the wall. They didn't see the success and the on-field product that they're putting out there. So for Dan Lanning to stay in Eugene is absolutely huge. And then we talked about it when he made that announcement video, how he turned it into a recruiting pitch. Give me a second here for a little sip. Excuse me, guys. All right, we're back. So, and that was like the mic drop moment of the whole video, right? He said, if you're scared of your coach leaving, then come play for us. The Ducks aren't going anywhere. I'm not leaving. So for the Ducks to get a commitment from one of the top available players in the entire transfer portal, the number one ranked wide receiver, mind you, that's huge. I mean, I really don't think you could have drawn up the last 48 hours for the Ducks any better than this. Sure, there was the limbo that they were in before Dan Lanning ultimately announced that he was going to be staying, but for him to stay in Eugene and then for them to get one of the best playmakers in the transfer portal is huge. And I was texting some people after that happened, and one person told me the rich get richer. And It certainly feels that way in Eugene. To look at the players that they've added from the transfer portal, it is certainly an offensive heavy class right now. You look at the top and you got Dylan Gabriel coming over from Oklahoma. So he'll be your starter in 2024, dual threat guy that is just a proven winner. Really, really like that addition for the Ducks and Will Stein's quarterback room. And then you messed around and you said, "Hey, let's get some Dante Moore as well while we're here in the transfer portal. He used to like us a little bit. Let's see if he wants to run it back." He hops on board. Now you have what looks like or projects to be Dylan Gabriel's successor for the 2025 season. I would assume that the plan is for Dante to redshirt if everything works out for them. Utilize those 4 games that he can appear in during the year. And then you have Matthew Bedford, the transfer offensive lineman from Indiana. He was committed to Colorado at one point, and now you have Jay Harris, the Northwest Missouri State running back. You pair him with with Noah Whittington. Got to remember that Bucky's heading to the league, Max. Come on. You pair Jay Harris with Noah Whittington and Jordan James, who had a heck of a year. So now you got a 3-headed monster out there in the backfield. So I think with this Evan Stewart addition, you can pretty confidently say that the receiver room, put a big check mark next to the wide receiver position for the Ducks heading into 2024. We already talked about all the pieces that they have there. Quarterback, you're solid. Running back, you're solid. You're feeling good about that O-line, just waiting on that return announcement from Marcus Harper, but feeling pretty confident that that is the case, that he is going to be staying in Eugene. You got your tackles back with Josh Connerly Jr. and Ajani Cornelius. Yapani Pancho Lalaulu is going to be taking over at center. And then you have Bedford taking that right guard spot more than likely, right? And then you have all the guys behind him that you're going to try to get into the rotation and continue developing. So I think some of the question marks really for Oregon maybe still remain on the defensive side of the ball. You're looking at the interior of that defensive line, and then you're also looking at the safety spot. You did bring in some reinforcements with Kobe Savage from Kansas State. That's a guy I am super excited about. You also have Cameron Alexander coming over from UTSA, lockdown cornerback with 15+ pass deflections in 2023, was also the MVP of the Frisco Bowl, or at least the defensive MVP, one of those accolades. And you also have Atticus Sappington from Oregon State, the kicker. I forgot to put him in my updated transfer hall tweet earlier today, so somebody corrected me on that one. Thanks for catching me. So important they're doing all the right things right now. And I think on paper, if you're looking at transfer portal guys for Oregon and looking at the rest of this class, or this haul, I should say, aside from Evan Stewart, I just mentioned it was an offensive heavy class. Maybe that's just the way it shakes out, or that's just the way it is right now, because there is still a lot of time to go with the transfer portal. So that the Ducks are going to continue to look at guys. I really think those are the only 2 positions that I would think they would continue to look at, is defensive line and safety. Tyshim Johnson's coming back at safety as well, so that's great. You have Aaron Flowers coming in from the 2024 recruiting class, All-American safety I saw last week out in Texas, from the state of Texas. Really, really battle-tested. Super excited about his upside. You also have Kingston Lopa, the 6'5" safety hybrid kind of guy, coming in from Sacramento. And then you have Cody DeCambra and Tyler Turner that you signed in the 2023 class. So you have some pieces to work with there if you're Chris Hampton. But I think just as far as this Evan Stewart addition, I'm just super, super excited about it, because the big time playmakers keep coming to Eugene. I think you look at these guys are looking at, I should say, the success of the Kenny Dillingham and then now Will Stein offense. Oh my God, what a year for Will Stein. That dude is a tremendous asset for this Oregon football program. So Will Stein doing it big in his first year in Eugene. I mean, top ranked in a variety of categories, or top 5, top 10. That offense lit the country on fire under Bo Nix, who was a Heisman Trophy finalist, and now he's going to head off to the NFL. And then you see the running backs that are just a force to be reckoned with every single game under Carlos Lachlan. And then look at those wide receivers. Look at Troy Franklin, who could very well be could have played himself into a first round selection in the 2024 NFL draft, but this is a loaded wide receiver group. But either way, I'm talking to these recruits, and they're seeing what Troy Franklin, Tez Johnson, and the rest of that wide receiver room are doing in Eugene, and it is special. They want to be a part of it again, which is so crazy. Not again, but it's so crazy that this Oregon offense is as lethal as it is. And maybe it's not crazy, but I just say that in the sense that Dan Lanning, defensive minded head coach, the defense is getting great and they're still working on bringing in some big time players, right? But did you expect the offense to be this good necessarily, given that you have a defensive minded head coach and then you had the transition from a really young offensive coordinator and then he left to take a head coaching job and then you bring in another offensive coordinator and the offense gets even better? Oregon is one of the hottest teams in college football right now. There's no other way to put it. And the fact that they have that stability, I put out a tweet yesterday after Dan Lanning announced he was going to be staying. That stability is attractive to recruits and their families, knowing that they're going to be able to say, hey, Dan's going to be here. Dan Lanning, hypothetically, but probably to some sense, right, turned down Alabama. That's another big point that we're looking at on the recruiting trail now. People are saying, hey, Dan Lanning has done such a good job at Oregon that Alabama came calling. And he said no, because he realizes how special what he's building in Eugene is, the opportunity to compete for a Big Ten conference title, to get back to the playoff in 2024 and maybe capture that first ever national championship. That means something to Dan Lanning and the rest of this coaching staff. So it's going to be a really exciting offseason, and it already is. It's crazy to say that we're looking forward now to the spring game, which is probably going to be in late April, early May. That's usually how it works historically. Was not able to go to the spring game last year. Had to attend a wedding, but family first. That was a super fun experience. Hoping to get out to the spring game this year, but now it's on to the 2025 class and then rounding out these transfer portal guys. So we'll probably continue to monitor those numbers and see where the Ducks are at as far as scholarships go. There's still a lot of time between now and even spring ball, and then the start of fall camp down the road in August. But if you guys know me, I live for this recruiting stuff. I am always here for it. The Ducks are continuing to do just really, really impressive things in the transfer portal and on the recruiting trail. They're continuing to establish or reaffirm themselves as one of the top recruiting powers in all of college football. The Ducks aren't going anywhere. Just like Dan Lanning said, they're continuing to bring in some ridiculous talent. And Evan Stewart, former 5-star recruit, is the latest addition, the latest example of that. If you guys want to find more of me, you can lock in with me on social media. I'm at Torres Sports on both Twitter and Instagram. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel at Oregon Football Max Torres. You can read all of my written work over on ducksdigest.com. And then do me a favor, you guys, share the Ducks Dish podcast with your friends, with your family, and with other Duck fans. There is so much going on. Just because we're in the off season, don't get it twisted. We are not going anywhere. There's going to be plenty of recruiting to follow because recruiting never stops. It never stops. But super fun episode for you guys today. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to talk some Duck football, talk some Duck recruiting with me, and we will see you on the next episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.